Welcome to Animate Bible Stories, where ancient truths come to life through powerful storytelling. In today's episode, we journey into the gripping tale of Gideon, the man who went from hiding in fear to leading a divine victory with just 300 men. It's not just a story of battle, it's about faith, obedience, and how God uses the most unlikely people to change history. So sit back, open your heart, and prepare to experience the Bible like never before, told in vivid, animated detail. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a single episode. Gideon, the reluctant warrior. When Israel forgot God. For 7 long and bitter years, the people of Israel lived under the heavy hand of the Midianites. Once a free people, they had become like fugitives in their own land. Every time the Israelites planted crops or raised livestock, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern tribes would swarm across the land like locusts. They came riding countless camels, sweeping in from the desert with overwhelming numbers. They didn't come just to conquer, they came to destroy. The Israelites tried to resist at first, but it was no use. Midian's strength was too great. So the people fled their homes and built shelters in caves and mountain clefts. They dug pits in the hillsides and lived in fear, watching helplessly as their food was plundered and their fields were trampled. Everything they had worked for was stolen or ruined. All of this suffering had a cause. Israel had forgotten their God. Despite everything the Lord had done for them, bringing them out of Egypt, leading them through the wilderness, and giving them the promised land, they had turned away. They no longer worshipped Yahweh as their only God. Instead, they adopted the gods of the surrounding nations, especially Baal and Asherah, false deities of fertility and rain. They built altars to idols, bowed before wooden poles, and exchanged the truth of God for lies. So God allowed Midian to oppress them, not to destroy them, but to wake them up. And when the pain became unbearable, the people cried out to the Lord. In response, God first sent a prophet, not a warrior, not a judge. The prophet spoke plainly. "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, I brought you up out of Egypt. I rescued you from slavery. I drove out your enemies and gave you their land. I told you, do not worship the gods of the Amorites. But you have not listened to me." It was a message of confrontation, not comfort. Before deliverance, there had to be repentance. But God was not done with his people. Even in their rebellion, he would raise up a deliverer, not a seasoned leader, but a frightened young man from a small clan. A man named Gideon. Gideon was threshing wheat when the Lord found him, but not in the usual way. Rather than doing it on a hilltop where the wind could separate grain from chaff, he was hiding in a winepress, a sunken pit meant for crushing grapes. He was afraid, trying to salvage a little food without drawing attention from Midianite raiders. In that fearful moment, the angel of the Lord appeared and greeted him with words that must have sounded absurd. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Gideon, startled and doubtful, answered bitterly, "If the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about? Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." It was an honest cry, part complaint, part despair. Yet God did not rebuke Gideon. Instead, he gave him a commission. "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand." "Am I not sending you?" Gideon's response was full of insecurity. "But Lord, how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." Again, the Lord reassured him with a promise that had echoed since the days of Moses. "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." Still, Gideon needed assurance. He asked for a sign. He quickly prepared an offering, a young goat, some unleavened bread, and broth, and brought it to the angel of the Lord. The angel told him to place the meal on a rock. When he touched it with the tip of his staff, fire flared up from the rock and consumed it. Then, the angel of the Lord disappeared. Suddenly, Gideon realized who he had been speaking to, not just a messenger, but a divine manifestation of the Lord himself. Terror seized him. "Alas, sovereign Lord," he cried. I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord spoke peace into his panic. "Peace. Do not be afraid. You are not going to die." Gideon built an altar on that spot and named it Yahweh Shalom, which means the Lord is peace. But peace was not yet at hand. That same night, God gave Gideon his first assignment, not against Midian, but against idolatry in his own household. God told him to tear down his father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole next to it. In its place, he was to build a proper altar to the Lord and offer a burnt sacrifice using the wood of the Asherah. It was a dangerous command. Baal worship was common in Israel by then, even in Gideon's own town. But Gideon obeyed, though he was too afraid to do it during the day. He gathered 10 of his servants and completed the task by night. When the townspeople discovered the destruction the next morning, they were furious. "Who did this?" they demanded. When they found out it was Gideon, they went to his father, Joash, and demanded his death. But Joash, once a Baal worshiper himself, had a sudden change of heart. He told the angry crowd, "Are you going to plead Baal's case? Are you going to save him? If Baal really is a god, let him defend himself when someone breaks down his altar." From that day on, Gideon became known as Jerubbaal, meaning, "Let Baal contend with him." The man who once hid from the enemy had now stood against the idol of his own people. His journey had begun, not as a general, but as a reformer. And though he didn't yet realize it, Gideon would soon become the vessel through which God would bring Israel out of fear and into freedom. The sound of the Spirit and the call to battle. After Gideon obeyed God by tearing down his father's altar to Baal and cutting down the Asherah pole, the atmosphere in Israel began to shift. Though he had acted by night out of fear, the boldness of his action reverberated across his town. The villagers were enraged, but when his father, Joash, stood up to defend him, declaring that if Baal were truly a god, he should defend himself, it settled the matter. Gideon, once timid and unknown, had now become a symbol of confrontation against idolatry. His new name, Jerubbaal, would serve as a reminder that he had challenged false gods and lived. Not long after that act of courage, the real enemy began to move. The Midianites, along with their powerful allies, the Amalekites and other eastern peoples, crossed over the Jordan River in their usual seasonal invasion. Like locusts, they filled the valley of Jezreel. Their camels were without number, and their presence struck terror into the hearts of Israel once again. But this time, God would not let his people remain defenseless. Then the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon Gideon. It was not a quiet inner prompting, it was a divine takeover. The same man who had once threshed wheat in fear was now clothed in the boldness of God himself. Gideon took a trumpet and blew it, summoning his clan, the Abiezrites, to follow him. He sent messengers throughout the land of Manasseh and to the tribes of Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, calling them to arms. The response was overwhelming. Men gathered to him, prepared to resist the Midianite threat. But despite this sudden momentum and divine anointing, Gideon's human doubts still lingered. He needed assurance, confirmation that he was truly doing God's will and that God would be with him to defeat such a mighty enemy. Gideon turned to God with an unusual request. He laid a fleece of wool on the threshing floor and prayed, "If you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised, then let the dew fall only on the fleece, while the ground around it remains dry." When he rose early the next morning, he found it just as he had asked. The fleece was wet with dew, while the ground was completely dry. Still uncertain, he asked again, this time in reverse, "Lord, do not be angry with me. Let me make one more request. Allow me this time to test the fleece the other way around. Let the fleece be dry, and the ground around it be covered with dew." Once again, God answered exactly as Gideon had asked. The next morning, the fleece was dry, and the surrounding ground was soaked. With these signs, Gideon's confidence grew. He gathered his troops, 32,000 strong. Though still vastly outnumbered by the Midianite horde, Israel had not seen such unity in years. But just as things seemed to be gaining momentum, God spoke again with a strange command. "You have too many men," the Lord said. "I cannot deliver Midian into their hands. or Israel would boast against me and say, "My own strength has saved me." God was not interested in numbers. He was not raising an army to prove military might, but to display his own power and sovereignty. He instructed Gideon to tell the people, "Anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave." At this, 22,000 men left the camp, leaving only 10,000. But even then, God said, "There are still too many." Gideon must have struggled with what was happening. The odds were already impossible, and now his army was shrinking rapidly. But he obeyed. God instructed Gideon to bring the men to the water, and he would separate them based on how they drank. Those who lapped the water with their tongues like dogs were placed in one group. Those who knelt down to drink were placed in another. Only 300 men drank with alertness, cupping the water in their hands and bringing it to their mouths. God said, "With the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands." The rest of the men were dismissed. From 32,000 to 300, God had whittled the army down to a fraction. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't logic. It was divine design. That night, as they camped near the Midianite valley, God saw that Gideon was still afraid. He told him, "If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack." Gideon did as instructed. He and Purah crept down near the enemy camp. What they heard there amazed him. 2 Midianite soldiers were speaking. One shared a dream he had. "I saw a round loaf of barley bread tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed." The other replied, "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." Gideon was stunned. Here in the enemy camp, God had confirmed his word again. The enemy themselves feared what was coming. He returned to his camp, his spirit stirred with courage. He called out to his men, "Get up. The Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands." Each of the 300 men was given a trumpet, a clay jar, and a torch hidden inside. They were to divide into 3 companies and surround the Midianite camp. It was not the usual equipment of war, but then again, this was no usual war. With only 300 men, armed with nothing more than torches, jars, and trumpets, Gideon was about to face a vast army. But Gideon was no longer the man in the winepress. The Spirit of the Lord had clothed him. God had spoken, and he had listened. The battle would begin, not with weapons, but with faith and with noise. The reluctant warrior was now a leader of deliverance. The breaking and the battle. The night was still, but tension ran like an electric current through the air. Campfires of the Midianite army flickered in the valley below, casting dancing shadows across the hillsides. The enemy was unaware that their downfall was already in motion, not by the strength of swords, but by the hand of the Lord, through just 300 men and their leader, Gideon. With his army now trimmed down to this handful, Gideon organized the men into 3 companies of 100 each. Every soldier was given a trumpet, a clay jar, and a torch hidden inside the jar. It was an unusual combination, and certainly not the equipment any soldier would expect to bring into battle. But Gideon had heard from God. He had listened, and now he obeyed. The plan was bold. The 3 groups would surround the perimeter of the Midianite camp under the cover of night. They were not to fight in the conventional sense, but to create divine confusion. Gideon instructed them, "Watch me. Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then blow yours from all around the camp and shout, 'For the Lord and for Gideon.'" As the companies moved into position in the darkness, the men kept their torches hidden and their jars intact. Every heart beat faster. Every footstep was placed with care. These were farmers and herdsmen, not trained warriors. Yet here they were, outnumbered and surrounded by a force so large it was described as thick as locusts. But they trusted Gideon. More importantly, they trusted the God who had led them this far. Then came the moment. At the exact time of the middle watch, sometime between 10 p.m. and midnight, Gideon and his company reached the edge of the camp. In an instant, the silence was shattered. They blew the trumpets. They smashed the jars. Suddenly, 300 torches burst into view from all directions around the Midianite camp. The noise of shattering clay, the blast of ram's horns, the cries echoing through the night. A sword for the Lord and for Gideon. It was chaos. To the Midianites, who had just changed the watch and were likely caught half awake, it seemed as though a vast army had surrounded them.
Confusion reigned.
Panic set in, and in the terror of the moment, they turned their swords on one another. Midianite soldiers struck down Amalekite ally, and Eastern tribal fighters fought their own. God had caused the enemy to destroy itself. As the camp fell into mayhem, Gideon's 300 remained outside, watching the Lord fulfill his promise. The enemy fled in all directions, some toward Beth-shittah, some towards Arira, and others as far as the border of Abel-Meholah near Tabbath. Gideon wasted no time. He sent messengers throughout the hill country of Ephraim, calling on the tribe to seize the waters of the Jordan ahead of the retreating Midianites. They captured the fords and cut off the enemy's escape. During the pursuit, 2 key Midianite commanders, Oreb and Zeb, were captured and killed. Oreb was slain at the rock that would bear his name, and Zeb at the winepress that would carry his legacy of defeat. Their heads were brought to Gideon beyond the Jordan. But even in victory, challenges arose. The men of Ephraim, though instrumental in capturing the fleeing enemy, were offended. They confronted Gideon, asking, "Why didn't you call us when you went to fight Midian?" Their pride was bruised. They wanted to be seen as part of the action from the beginning. Gideon, with wisdom and humility, calmed them. He replied, "What have I accomplished compared to you? Aren't the gleanings of Ephraim better than the full harvest of Abiezer? God gave Oreb and Zeb into your hands. What was I able to do compared to you?" His gentle and diplomatic response cooled their anger, and peace was restored. But the battle wasn't over. Gideon and his 300, weary yet relentless, continued the pursuit across the Jordan. They were chasing 2 Midianite kings, Zebah and Zalmunna, who had escaped with a remnant of their army, around 15,000 men. It was a dangerous move, a small, exhausted force pursuing a much larger group across the wilderness. But Gideon was determined to complete what God had begun. As they passed through the town of Sukkos, he requested bread for his men. "Give my troops some bread. They are worn out, and I am still pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna." But the leaders of Sukkos mocked him. "Do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give bread to your army?" It was a direct insult. But Gideon did not retaliate in the moment. He simply replied, "Very well. When the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will tear your flesh with desert thorns and briars." He moved on to the next town, Peniel, and made the same request. There, too, he was mocked and rejected. Again, Gideon warned them, "When I return in triumph, I will tear down this tower."
He pressed on.
Eventually, with the help of divine guidance and the element of surprise, Gideon and his 300 men attacked the remaining enemy force. They surprised Zebah and Zalmunna at Karkar, routed the enemy, and captured the 2 kings. The victory was complete. Gideon then returned by the same route through Sukkos. He called out the elders and punished them as he had vowed, disciplining the leaders with thorns and briars as a lesson in honoring God's mission. In Peniel, he tore down the tower and dealt with their resistance firmly. He confronted Zebah and Zalmunna personally. He questioned them about a raid they had once carried out, in which they killed his brothers at Tabor. They admitted their role, saying, "They were like you. Each one looked like a prince." And Gideon, still grieving the loss, declared, "Those were my brothers, the sons of my own mother. As surely as the Lord lives, if you had spared them, I would not kill you." Then he executed both kings, bringing justice full circle. The battle was over. The threat of Midian was broken. Gideon had started with fear and hesitation, but he had finished with faith and obedience. His name would be remembered among the great deliverers of Israel. The crown, the gold, and the trap. With the defeat of Zebah and Zalmunna, Gideon had completed what seemed impossible. Israel, long terrorized by the Midianites and their allies, was finally free. The once timid man who hid in a winepress was now a national hero, and the people rejoiced. The name of Gideon echoed across tribes and territories. The victory was so complete that the fear of Midian would linger for decades. In the wake of such triumph, Israel turned to Gideon with a proposition that revealed both their gratitude and their longing for stability. They said to him, "Rule over us, you, your son and your grandson, because you have saved us from the hand of Midian." It was the kind of offer that would tempt even the most humble heart: a crown, a dynasty, and glory. After years of oppression and lawlessness, the people craved a king to bring order. To them, Gideon was that man. But Gideon's response was clear, noble, and rooted in deep spiritual awareness. He said, "I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." In that moment, Gideon showed rare restraint. He knew that the victory did not belong to him. It belonged to God. He refused the crown, resisting what might have been the beginning of monarchy in Israel. He reminded the people that Yahweh alone was their true king. However, Gideon was still a man, flawed and influenced by his culture. Though he refused political rule, he made a curious request. He said to the people, "Let me make a request of you. Every one of you give me an earring from your share of the plunder." The earrings were from the spoils taken from the Ishmaelites, Midianite allies who wore gold jewelry. The people gladly complied, spreading out a cloth on which they threw their golden earrings. In total, the gold weighed about 1,700 shekels, roughly 42 pounds, not including the ornaments, pendants, and purple garments taken from the kings, nor the crescent-shaped decorations from their camels. With all this gold, Gideon did something unexpected. He made an ephod, a type of priestly garment or object, and placed it in his hometown of Ophrah. Here, the narrative takes a sobering turn. Though Gideon likely meant it as a tribute or a memorial to God, the ephod became a spiritual trap. The people of Israel began to worship it. They prostituted themselves spiritually before it, treating it as a sacred object of power. Even Gideon's household was influenced by it. The man who had torn down Baal's altar had now unintentionally created another source of idolatry. The ephod, though crafted in a moment of national triumph, became a snare. Nevertheless, for the rest of Gideon's life, Israel enjoyed peace. The Midianites were subdued and never again raised their heads. The land had rest for 40 years during Gideon's leadership. It was a time of quiet recovery, a time to rebuild farms, replant vineyards, and raise families without fear. Gideon settled into civilian life. He returned to Ophrah and lived as a respected judge, though not a king. However, his personal life reflected a kind of informal royal status. He had many wives and 70 sons, all his own offspring, a sign of wealth and influence. He even took a concubine from Shechem, a city with a complicated spiritual history, and she bore him a son, whom Gideon named Abimelech, meaning "my father is king." Though Gideon had refused kingship publicly, the name he gave this son hinted at what lay beneath the surface. Whether it was a personal contradiction or simply cultural influence, this decision would later have grave consequences. Eventually, Gideon, also called Jerubbaal, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father, Joash, in Ophrah. But as soon as Gideon was gone, the hearts of the Israelites turned again. They forgot the Lord their God, who had rescued them repeatedly. They forgot the miracles, the Midianite defeat, the shattered jars and torches. They forgot Gideon himself and the salvation he had led them through. Instead, they prostituted themselves again to the Baals. They made Baalberith their god, a name that means Lord of the Covenant. It was a blasphemous mockery of the true covenant God had made with them. And as if that wasn't enough, they showed no loyalty to Gideon's family. The man who had risked his life to rescue them was forgotten. His legacy was left unguarded. In the space left by Gideon's death and the people's unfaithfulness, darkness would rise again. This time not from outside, but from within his own house. Abimelech, the son of Gideon's concubine, would soon make his own violent grab for power. But the story of Gideon, though ending in quiet sadness, remains a monument to what God can do with a fearful, doubting man who is willing to obey. Through Gideon, God proved that faith, not force, wins the battle. That obedience, not numbers, brings victory. And yet, the golden ephod stands as a sobering reminder that even after the greatest of victories, the heart must remain submitted to God, or else even good things can become idols. The son of a king, the rise and fall of Abimelech. After the death of Gideon, Israel slipped once again into spiritual amnesia. The people forgot the Lord who had delivered them. They abandoned the one who had answered their cries during the years of Midianite oppression. The altar to Baal that Gideon once tore down was replaced by a new god, Baal-berith, Lord of the Covenant. It was a blasphemous name, pretending loyalty while offering worship to a false god. Israel also forgot Gideon. Though they had once begged him to rule over them, they showed no kindness to his family after his death. The peace that had lasted 40 years under his leadership was about to be shattered, not by foreign invasion, but by ambition and bloodshed from within. Among Gideon's many sons was Abimelech, the child of a concubine from Shechem. Unlike Gideon's other sons, who were raised in Ophrah under their father's household, Abimelech grew up in a city with its own history, its own idols, and its own agenda. His very name, Abimelech, meaning "my father is king," was a contradiction of Gideon's final refusal to wear a crown. The boy grew up believing that kingship was not only desirable, but his birthright. When Gideon died, Abimelech saw his chance. He traveled to Shechem and approached his mother's family, saying, "Ask all the citizens of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of Jerubbaal's sons rule over you, or that one man rules. Remember, I am your flesh and blood." It was a cunning appeal. By drawing on blood ties, he turned family into politics. The leaders of Shechem were swayed. They gave him 70 silver shekels from the temple of Baal-berith, God's enemies financing a wicked rise. With that silver, Abimelech hired a band of reckless men, mercenaries who followed him without question. Then came one of the darkest acts in Israel's history. Abimelech went to Ophrah and murdered all 70 of his half-brothers, Gideon's sons, in one day, on a single stone. It was a cold, calculated slaughter to eliminate any rival claims. Only one son escaped, Jotham, the youngest. He fled and hid, and his survival would become a prophetic thorn in Abimelech's flesh. With his brothers dead and Shechem behind him, Abimelech was declared king by the people of Shechem beside the great tree at the pillar in Shechem, a place once sacred to the Lord. The nation that had rejected monarchy now crowned a man with blood on his hands. But God had not forgotten. Soon after Abimelech's coronation, Jotham, the surviving son, came forward. From the top of Mount Gerizim, he shouted a parable to the leaders of Shechem, the first recorded parable in the Bible. He told of trees seeking a king. They went to the olive tree, the fig tree, and the vine. Each refused to leave their fruitful purpose. But when they asked the thorn bush, it said, "If you really want to anoint me king, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, let fire come out from me and consume the cedars of Lebanon." Jotham ended his warning with a curse. If the people had acted honorably in making Abimelech king, may they rejoice. But if they had acted wickedly, then fire would come from Abimelech to destroy Shechem, and fire from Shechem to destroy him. Then Jotham fled again, disappearing from history. But his words would soon come true. Abimelech reigned for 3 years, but it was not a rule of peace. God stirred up ill will between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem, just as Jotham had foretold. The people grew weary of Abimelech's tyranny. They set ambushes in the mountains to rob travelers and undermine his rule. A rival emerged, Gaul's son of Ebed, who boasted before the citizens of Shechem, saying, "Who is Abimelech, and why should we serve him? If I were in charge, I would get rid of him." Abimelech heard of this rebellion and struck swiftly. He and his men ambushed Gaul and his forces at night. By dawn, the battle raged. Gaul was defeated, driven out, and Shechem fell back under Abimelech's control. But Abimelech's revenge was not satisfied. The next day, as the people of Shechem came out to their fields, Abimelech attacked again. He split his men into 3 companies ambushed the people, and slaughtered them. Then, in a brutal act of vengeance, he razed the city and sowed it with salt, a symbolic act to curse the land and ensure its desolation. Some of the Shechemites fled to the Tower of El-Berith, a stronghold of their false god. But Abimelech set fire to the entrance, burning the tower down with 1,000 men and women trapped inside. It was a massacre. Still not finished, Abimelech moved on to Thebez, another city that may have sympathized with Shechem. There, too, the people fled to a tower. As Abimelech prepared to burn it like the last one, a woman dropped a millstone from the top, striking him on the head and crushing his skull. Fatally wounded, Abimelech cried to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and kill me, so that people can't say, 'A woman killed him.'" His servant obeyed, and Abimelech died. But his legacy was sealed. God repaid Abimelech for the wickedness he had done to his brothers. And he also repaid the leaders of Shechem for their treachery. Jotham's curse had been fulfilled completely. After Abimelech's death, peace returned. The chaos and violence born out of pride, ambition, and betrayal finally ended. God raised up another judge afterward, Tola, the son of Puah, but that's a story for another time. The legacy of Gideon, however, remained two-sided, one of courage and deliverance, and one of silent compromise that left doors open for future disaster. Final reflection. The story of Gideon began in weakness and ended in warning. A fearful man became a mighty deliverer. Yet even great victories can be undone by hidden pride and legacy mismanagement. Gideon trusted God in battle, but may have lost sight of him in peace. Abimelech, the son of a concubine and a flawed name, turned ambition into ruin. From their lives we learn, God can use the least likely people to do great things. Obedience matters more than numbers. Idolatry, even in subtle forms, always leads to destruction. Legacy is not built only in battle, but in what you leave behind. May we trust the Lord not only in crisis, but in peace. May we build altars of remembrance, not golden traps. And may we pass on to our children the fear of the Lord, not the thirst for power. That was the story of Gideon, the reluctant warrior, a powerful reminder that God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. If this story stirred your faith or gave you fresh insight, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear what stood out to you. And hey, there's more to come. Subscribe now to Animate Bible Stories and join us for the next life-changing episode. Until next time, keep your faith alive and your heart open to God's voice.